All right, let's get into a topic that honestly is confusing for so many people. The overlap between ADHD and borderline personality disorder, or BPD. From the outside, they can look surprisingly similar, but on the inside, well, they're driven by completely different worlds. Let's try to understand them a little better.
So here's the big question, right? When you see someone who's impulsive, maybe emotionally intense, seems kind of scattered, how do you tell what's really going on under the surface? That's the puzzle we're going to try to piece together today.
And to really make this make sense, we're not just going to rattle off a list of symptoms. That's not very helpful. Instead, we're going to follow the stories of two people, Alex and Sam. By watching how they move through the exact same situations, we're going to uncover the hidden drivers behind what they do and how they feel.
So let's meet him. On one hand, we have Alex. He's 28, an amazing graphic designer, super creative, tons of ideas. But yeah, he can be pretty scattered. For the most part, though, he's a generally optimistic guy. And then there's Sam. She's 26, works in marketing, and she is incredibly passionate. But her inner world is, well, it's a roller coaster of really intense emotions. And she has a deep, deep struggle with her own self-image.
Okay, first up, let's drop them into a situation we've all been in, a stressful work deadline. What you're about to see is how one single event can create two completely different internal worlds.
So, the inevitable happens, they both miss the deadline. Alex's reaction is just classic ADHD. It's, oh no, I completely lost track of time. He's frustrated for sure, he's kicking himself a little, but he finds a new plan and moves on pretty fast. Sam's reaction, on the other hand, feels like an emotional catastrophe. Her first thought isn't about time management, it's about her very worth as a person. I'm a complete failure. My boss absolutely hates me. The feeling isn't just frustration, it's this crushing wave of devastation and shame.
And that right there, that's the whole difference in a nutshell. For Alex, the missed deadline is a practical problem to be solved. For Sam, it's deeply personal. It kicks off this intense, downward spiral. That thought, maybe I should just quit before they fire me, isn't just a fleeting moment of panic for her. In that moment, it feels like the only logical conclusion. Now let's switch gears and look at something even more personal: friendships. A friend cancels plans at the last minute. It happens to everyone. But the reasoning behind their reactions, well, that tells us everything we need to know.
And right away you can see their thinking just splits into two totally different paths. Alex is bummed out, of course, but his mind immediately looks for an external cause. Ah, that sucks, but they've probably got a good reason. He assumes it's about his friend's situation. Sam's mind, however, immediately turns inward. To her, the cancellation is direct evidence of her own value. They don't really want to be my friend.
And that's it, you see. For Alex, it's an inconvenience. Annoying, but just an inconvenience. For Sam, it feels like proof. It confirms her deepest, most terrifying fear: abandonment. It was never really about the canceled plan. It was about what it seemed to say about her.
Okay, so this brings us to one of the biggest points of confusion between these two: impulsivity. Both Alex and Sam can be impulsive, no doubt, but the why behind that action could not be more different. On the surface, it might look like the same spontaneous choice, but the internal driver is what really matters.
Let's break this down. For Alex, his impulsivity is really driven by excitement and, frankly, just poor impulse control. He sees a cool $300 piece of software at 2 in the morning, his brain says, I want it, and he buys it. Sometimes it's wasteful, but hey, sometimes it leads to a great new skill. Now look at Sam. Her impulsivity is a desperate attempt to escape overwhelming emotional pain or that feeling of not knowing who she is. So after a huge fight, she might impulsively cut off all her hair or get a tattoo. It's an action designed to change the way she feels inside, and often it leads to regret. But here's the most important part. These challenges are not life sentences, not even close. There are absolutely paths forward for both Alex and Sam to not just cope, but to really, truly thrive. So let's see what those different journeys might look like. For Alex and his ADHD, the path is often about managing his executive functions. This might mean medication to help his brain focus and organize, paired with therapy that gives him real, practical strategies for things like time management. The goal is never to change his creative, high-energy self. It's about giving him the tools to use it better. And his perspective on it is just perfect. The meds don't change who I am. They just help me be more me. Sam's journey, on the other hand, is really about healing. It's often centered on something called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which is all about learning skills for emotional regulation. The whole point is to build more stable relationships and find a stronger, more solid sense of who she is. And her takeaway is so powerful. I'm learning that my feelings are valid, but not always facts.
It's about creating that tiny, crucial pause between a huge feeling and a reaction. So, we've seen their separate paths, but what happens when these two very different internal worlds actually connect? What if Alex and Sam were friends? Well, this is where understanding has to become a bridge to get over some very real potential conflicts. And you know what? They could actually be amazing friends. Alex's generally steady, optimistic nature could be a really secure anchor for Sam. And Sam's incredible emotional depth could help Alex, who's sometimes lost in his own head, feel truly seen and understood. The friction happens when Alex's distractibility makes him forget plans, which triggers Sam's fear of abandonment, or when Sam's emotional intensity feels overwhelming for Alex. At the end of the day, the key for them, and really for all of us, is communication and a genuine effort to understand what the other person's world feels like.
So if you remember just one thing from all of this, let it be this. This is the crucial point. Alex's struggles, things like organization, focus, remembering stuff, they're pretty consistent across his whole life. But for Sam, her struggles become most intense, most powerful, and most volatile when they're triggered by stress in her relationships. That right there is the core difference.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. You know, whether it's for our friends, our family, or even for ourselves, these labels can get really confusing and tangled. But what if getting the label exactly right isn't the most important thing? What if the first, most powerful step to actually helping is simply to try and understand? Something to think about.